The moment I saw Sharon from the HOA standing on my driveway at 6 in the morning, holding her ever-present clipboard like a weapon, I knew my day was about to go sideways. I had just finished attaching my plow blade to my truck, preparing for what the weather report promised would be a significant snowstorm rolling through our neighborhood in Oakmont, Pennsylvania. It was early December, and I had done this same routine for the past 3 winters without incident. But Sharon had that look on her face, the one that said she had found something new to complain about, and she was going to milk it for everything it was worth. "Zachary Carson," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cold morning air. "I need to speak with you immediately about a violation." I set down my wrench and turned to face her, already feeling the irritation building in my chest. Sharon Mitchell was in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move, even in the strongest wind. She wore a puffy designer jacket that probably cost more than my truck payment, and her lips were pressed into that thin line of disapproval I had come to know too well. "Morning, Sharon. What seems to be the problem?" She gestured dramatically at my truck, her manicured nails catching the early morning light. That monstrosity you have attached to your vehicle, it is not permitted on this property." I looked at my plow blade, then back at her, genuinely confused. "My plow?" "I have had this for 3 years, Sharon. I use it to clear driveways in the neighborhood. People ask me to help them out. Well, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that you have been operating what essentially amounts to a commercial business from your residence, which is strictly prohibited under Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. Furthermore, the equipment itself is unsightly and does not align with our aesthetic standards." I wiped my hands on my jeans, trying to keep my voice level. "Sharon, I help people clear their driveways when it snows. I charge maybe $20 to cover gas. That is hardly a commercial business. The HOA board met yesterday evening, and we have determined that your snow removal activities constitute commercial operations. Additionally, the plow attachment is considered commercial equipment and cannot be stored or displayed on your property. You have 24 hours to remove it, or you will face fines of $100 per day." My neighbor, Frank Rodriguez, had come out of his house across the street and was watching the interaction with interest. He had been one of the people who regularly asked me to help clear his driveway since he had a bad back and could not handle the shoveling anymore. "Sharon, a major storm is coming. People are going to need help clearing their driveways. Then they can hire the approved contractor that the HOA has arranged to have on standby for such situations. We have negotiated a rate with Premium Snow Solutions, and they will be available to service any homeowner who needs assistance." "What rate?" I asked, already suspecting I would not like the answer. $150 per driveway for standard clearing services. It is a very reasonable rate for professional services. I actually laughed out loud at that. "Sharon, you cannot be serious. That is highway robbery. I charge people $20, and that is just to cover my gas and time. The HOA has determined that Premium Snow Solutions meets our standards for professionalism and reliability. Your services, while perhaps well-intentioned, do not meet those standards. The decision is final, Zachary. Remove the plow blade or face the consequences." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her car, leaving me standing in my driveway, anger simmering just below the surface. Frank crossed the street, shaking his head. "Man, that is complete nonsense," he said. "You do great work, and you save us all a fortune. What are we supposed to do now, pay that ridiculous rate?" "I guess so," I muttered, staring at the plow blade I had saved up for 3 years ago. It had been a significant investment. but I loved being able to help my neighbors, and the little bit of extra money I made during the winter months helped offset my heating bills. The snow started falling around noon, gentle at first, then building into the heavy, wet snow that the forecasters had predicted. By 3 in the afternoon, we had 6 inches on the ground, and it showed no signs of stopping. I sat in my living room, watching through the window as the snow piled up on driveways and sidewalks throughout the neighborhood. My truck sat in the garage, the plow blade now detached and propped against the wall, a reminder of the stupidity of HOA regulations. My phone started ringing around 4 o'clock. It was Frank. "Zach, I just called that Premium Snow Solutions company. They said they cannot get to us until tomorrow morning at the earliest. The storm has them backed up with all their contracts, and apparently they prioritize commercial properties first. My driveway is completely snowed in, and Mary needs to get to her shift at the hospital by 6. I wish I could help, Frank, but Sharon made it pretty clear what would happen if I used my plow. This is ridiculous, man. Absolutely ridiculous." Over the next hour, I received 7 more calls from neighbors, all with the same story. Premium Snow Solutions was backed up. They could not get anyone out until the following day, and people were stuck. Some had work obligations, others had medical appointments, and a few just needed to get out for basic necessities. I sat there, watching the snow fall, feeling completely helpless and increasingly angry. The HOA had created this problem, and now everyone was suffering for it. By evening, the snow had reached 14 inches, and the temperature was dropping fast. My phone rang again, but this time it was an unknown number. "Hello, is this Zachary Carson?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, worried. "Yes, who is this? My name is Helen Sanders. I live 3 streets over on Maple Drive. I got your number from Frank Rodriguez." "Mr. Carson, I know the HOA has told you not to plow, but I am desperate. My husband Gerald has a dialysis appointment tomorrow morning at 7. It is critical that he makes it, and our driveway is completely impassable. Premium Snow Solutions told me they cannot get to us until late tomorrow afternoon. I am willing to pay you whatever you need, but please, we need help." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. On one hand, I faced substantial fines if I violated the HOA's directive. On the other hand, a man's health was at stake. "Mrs. Sanders, I will be there in 20 minutes. "Oh, thank you so much." I grabbed my keys and headed to the garage. If the HOA wanted to fine me for helping someone get to a medical appointment, then they could go right ahead and try. I would fight them every step of the way. Helen Sanders' house was just as she had described, with a steep driveway completely buried under nearly 15 inches of snow. I attached the plow blade in her garage, out of sight of any passing HOA board members, and got to work. It took me 40 minutes to clear the driveway completely and salt it down. Helen came out as I was finishing, tears in her eyes, pressing a $100 bill into my hand. "Mrs. Sanders, this is too much. I only need 20 for gas." "You take it, young man. You might have saved my husband's life tonight. The HOA should be ashamed of themselves for putting us in this position." I took the money, knowing she would not accept it back, and moved on to Frank's house. Then to 3 other neighbors who had called. By the time I finished at 9 o'clock that evening, I had cleared 7 driveways. My arms ached, and I had made nearly $400 in tips that people insisted I take. I also knew that Sharon Mitchell probably had half a dozen reports sitting on her desk by now. Sure enough, the next morning, there was an official notice taped to my front door. The envelope contained a formal violation letter, complete with photographs of my truck with the plow blade attached, taken from various angles the previous evening. Someone had been following me, documenting my every move. Violation of HOA Guidelines Section 12, Paragraph 4, Operation of Commercial Business. Violation of HOA Guidelines Section 8, Paragraph 2, Display of Commercial Equipment. Total fines assessed, $700. Additional fines of $100 per day will continue until compliance is achieved. I crumpled the letter in my fist and immediately called my lawyer, Marcus Webb. Marcus had handled the closing on my house and had warned me about the HOA even then. Marcus, I need your advice on fighting an HOA fine. Let me guess, Sharon Mitchell strikes again. I explained the situation, the emergency circumstances, the medical appointment, and the outrageous contractor rates the HOA had arranged. Okay, here is what we are looking at, Marcus said after a long pause. The HOA technically has the right to regulate business operations within the community. However, you have got a strong argument that this was not commercial activity in the traditional sense, especially given the emergency circumstances and the medical necessity. The problem is that fighting this will cost you time and money, and HOAs can be incredibly stubborn. What do you recommend? Pay the initial fine under protest, which preserves your right to challenge it later. Document everything. Keep records of what Premium Snow Solutions charges versus what you charge. Get statements from the neighbors you helped, especially Mrs. Sanders, about the medical necessity. Meanwhile, I will draft a formal challenge to the HOA's policy. We can argue that their contractor arrangement represents a conflict of interest if anyone on the board is benefiting financially. That last part caught my attention. You think someone on the board is getting kickbacks? In my experience, when an HOA suddenly bans a free or low-cost service and replaces it with an expensive contractor, there is usually a reason. Do some digging. Find out who owns Premium Snow Solutions, who their registered agent is, and any connections they might have to HOA board members. I spent the rest of that morning doing exactly that. Pennsylvania has relatively accessible business registration records, and within an hour, I had found something interesting. Premium Snow Solutions was registered as an LLC, with the managing member listed as Gregory Mitchell. The same last name as Sharon. I dug deeper. Public records showed that Gregory Mitchell was married to Sharon Mitchell, and he had registered the business only 6 months earlier, right around the time the HOA had started revising their community guidelines. This was bigger than I had thought. I called Marcus back immediately. I found something. The contractor the HOA is pushing is owned by Sharon's husband. Now that is what we call a conflict of interest. That changes everything. Pennsylvania law requires HOA board members to disclose any financial interests in vendors the association does business with. If Sharon pushed this contractor without disclosing that her husband owns it, she has violated state law and possibly committed fraud. What do? You are going to request a special meeting of the HOA. Pennsylvania law gives homeowners the right to petition for meetings. You will need signatures from at least 15% of the homeowners in the community. Think you can get that? After last night? Yeah, I think I can. I started with Frank, who signed immediately and offered to help gather more signatures. We went door to door throughout the neighborhood, explaining what I had discovered about Sharon and Premium Snow Solutions. The response was overwhelming. People were furious. Many had already paid the inflated rates for snow removal, not knowing they were essentially funneling money into Sharon's household. Within 3 days, I had signatures from 63 homeowners out of the 214 homes in our community, well over the 15% requirement. I submitted the petition to the HOA, requesting a special meeting to address the snow removal policy and Sharon Mitchell's conflict of interest. The HOA was required by law to hold the meeting within 30 days. They scheduled it for the absolute last possible day, clearly hoping to delay and discourage attendance. But they had underestimated how angry people were. The meeting was held in the community center on a cold Saturday afternoon in early January. I had expected maybe 20 or 30 people to show up. Instead, the room was packed with over 100 homeowners, many of whom were still fuming about the money they had been forced to pay Premium Snow Solutions. Sharon sat at the head table with 4 other board members: Patricia Hallbrook, the treasurer; David Sung, the secretary; Lisa Fernandez, a regular board member; and Robert Kimball, the vice president. Sharon held the president position, and she clearly relished the authority it gave her. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, her expression tight with barely concealed annoyance. This special meeting has been called at the petition of certain homeowners to discuss the snow removal policy enacted in November. The floor is open for comments, but I want to remind everyone that the board has the authority to set and enforce community standards as outlined in our governing documents. I stood up immediately, my heart pounding. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, but I was fueled by righteous anger. My name is Zachary Carson, and I am the homeowner who submitted this petition. I am here today because I believe the board, specifically Sharon Mitchell, has engaged in a serious conflict of interest that has cost this community thousands of dollars. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Sharon banged her gavel. "Mr. Carson, you will address your comments respectfully, or you will be removed from this meeting." "I am being completely respectful, Sharon. I am also being factual." The board banned my snow plow and forced everyone to use Premium Snow Solutions, a company that charges $150 per driveway. What the board did not disclose is that Premium Snow Solutions is owned by your husband, Gregory Mitchell. The room exploded in angry shouts and accusations. Sharon's face went pale, then flushed deep red. "That is a private business matter and has no bearing on the board's decision." Marcus stood up from where he had been sitting near the back. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, under Pennsylvania law, specifically Section 5311 of the Nonprofit Corporation Law, board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the association, not their personal financial interests. You are required to disclose any financial relationship with vendors and recuse yourself from any votes involving those vendors. Did you do that?" Sharon's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Patricia Hallbrook, the treasurer, leaned over and whispered something to her urgently. "I do not have to answer to you," Sharon finally said. "You are not even a homeowner in this community." "No, but I am their legal counsel, and I am advising my clients that you have potentially violated state law. Furthermore, I have obtained documentation showing that Premium Snow Solutions has received over $40,000 in revenue from this community in the past 2 months alone. That represents a significant financial benefit that you directly profited from while serving in a position of trust." The other board members were now whispering urgently among themselves. David Sung, the secretary, looked genuinely shocked, suggesting he had not known about the connection. Lisa Fernandez looked angry, her arms crossed over her chest as she stared at Sharon. An older gentleman in the front row stood up. I recognized him as Thomas Hart, a retired attorney who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. "I move that Sharon Mitchell be immediately removed from her position as HOA president due to conflict of interest and violation of her fiduciary duty. Further, I move that we rescind the snow removal policy and refund any homeowners who paid premium snow solutions, with the funds coming from Mrs. Mitchell's personal finances, not the HOA reserves. Second, at least a dozen voices called out simultaneously. Sharon was on her feet now, her face contorted with rage. You cannot do this. I have done nothing wrong. I have served this community for 8 years. You have served yourself, Frank called out from the middle of the room. My wife almost missed her shift at the hospital because your company could not be bothered to show up when you said you would. Meanwhile, Zach cleared our driveway in 20 minutes for $20. More voices joined in, people sharing their stories of premium snow solutions' poor service, missed appointments, and inflated charges. One woman, elderly and leaning on a cane, stood up with tears in her eyes. I am on a fixed income. I paid Premium Snow Solutions $150 to clear my driveway, and they did such a poor job that I slipped and fell on the ice they left behind. I fractured my wrist. That is money I needed for my medications, and I got injured because your husband's company did not care enough to do the job properly. The mood in the room had shifted from angry to downright hostile. Sharon seemed to realize she had lost control of the situation entirely. Robert Kimball, the vice president, stood up and cleared his throat. I was not aware of Sharon's connection to Premium Snow Solutions when we voted on this policy. I believe a vote to remove her from the board is appropriate, and I support rescinding the snow removal policy immediately. However, the issue of refunds should be handled through proper legal channels. We need to consult with the HOA's attorney before making that decision. Our attorney is going to tell you the same thing I am, Marcus called out. Sharon Mitchell violated her fiduciary duty and unjustly enriched herself at the expense of the homeowners. Those homeowners are entitled to restitution. Patricia Hallbrook stood up, looking shaken. I would like to formally request that we table the discussion of refunds pending legal review, but I support an immediate vote on Sharon's removal from the board and the rescission of the snow removal policy. David Sung nodded. I agree. All in favor of removing Sharon Mitchell from her position as president and as a member of the HOA board, say aye. The room erupted in a thunderous chorus of aye votes. Sharon stood there, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. All opposed. David continued, silence. The motion passes. Sharon, you are removed from the board effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA documents and property in your possession. Sharon's hands were shaking as she gathered her things. This is not over. I will be consulting with my own attorney. This whole proceeding is illegal. You do that, Marcus called out. And while you are at it, explain to your attorney why you thought it was appropriate to fine Mr. Carson $700 for helping elderly neighbors get to medical appointments while you profited from an undisclosed business relationship. Sharon stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her hard enough that the windows rattled. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked but determined. Robert Kimball took over as acting president. Okay, let us move forward. I propose we immediately rescind the snow removal policy and issue a formal apology to Mr. Carson. Additionally, we should refund his fines and compensate him for any legal expenses he has incurred. The vote was unanimous among the remaining board members and met with enthusiastic applause from the homeowners in attendance. But I was not done yet. I appreciate that, but we still need to address the fact that Sharon and her husband took over $40,000 from this community under false pretenses. That is fraud. People should not just get their money back. There should be consequences. Thomas Hart stood up again. Mr. Carson is right. I recommend that we file a formal complaint with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office and pursue civil litigation against both Sharon and Gregory Mitchell for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus nodded. I can help coordinate that. We should also report this to the local district attorney's office. While this is primarily a civil matter, there may be criminal implications depending on how the arrangement was structured and whether any HOA funds were misappropriated. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA hired a forensic accountant to review all financial transactions related to premium snow solutions. What they found was even worse than we had initially suspected. Sharon had not just pushed her husband's company on the homeowners. She had also approved several payments from HOA reserve funds to premium snow solutions for common area snow removal at rates triple what previous contractors had charged. In total, she had funneled nearly $60,000 to her husband's company, with about $40,000 coming directly from homeowners and $20,000 from HOA reserves. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into potential theft and fraud charges. Meanwhile, I worked with Marcus to file a civil suit on behalf of the affected homeowners. Sharon and Gregory hired an expensive attorney out of Pittsburgh, and they tried to argue that the business relationship was not a secret, that Sharon had verbally disclosed it at a board meeting. However, David Sung had kept meticulous minutes of all board meetings, and there was no record of any such disclosure. In fact, the minutes showed that Sharon had been the one to propose the policy change and had pushed it through over concerns from other board members about the high cost. The civil case moved through the courts over the next several months. During discovery, we obtained emails between Sharon and Gregory discussing how much money they could make from the arrangement and laughing about the homeowners who were too lazy to shovel their own driveways. Those emails were devastating to their defense. In late April, we reached a settlement. Sharon and Gregory agreed to refund all money paid by homeowners to Premium Snow Solutions, plus an additional $20,000 in punitive damages to be split among the affected homeowners. They also agreed to repay the HOA reserves with interest. In total, they had to come up with over $90,000. To cover the settlement, they had to sell their home in the community and move. I would be lying if I said I was not deeply satisfied watching the moving trucks pull away in early June. The criminal case was more complicated. The district attorney ultimately decided that while Sharon's conduct was unethical and a clear breach of her fiduciary duty, it did not quite rise to the level of criminal fraud because homeowners had technically received a service, even if it was overpriced, and pushed through a conflict of interest. Instead, Sharon agreed to a plea deal on a lesser charge of theft by deception related to the HOA reserve funds. She received 2 years of probation, had to perform 200 hours of community service, and was barred from serving on any HOA board in Pennsylvania for 10 years. Gregory's business, Premium Snow Solutions, collapsed under the weight of the scandal and negative publicity. He tried to rebrand and restart under a different name, but word had gotten around in the local community, and nobody would hire him. As for me, the HOA formally apologized and rescinded all fines. They also passed a new policy explicitly allowing homeowners to provide snow removal services to their neighbors as long as it did not create a nuisance or safety hazard. The new board even asked if I would be willing to be added to an approved list of local, affordable snow removal options they could recommend to homeowners. I agreed, with the stipulation that the HOA could not mandate or favor any particular provider. That next winter, when the first big storm rolled through Oakmont, I was out with my plow blade at dawn, helping clear driveways for my neighbors. Frank was one of the first people I stopped to help, and as I finished clearing his driveway, he came out with 2 cups of coffee and a huge smile. "You know, Zach, I have lived in HOAs for 20 years, and this is the first time I have ever seen homeowners actually win a fight against the board. You did something amazing here." "We all did it together," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Sharon just pushed too far and people finally had enough." "True, but you were the one who stood up first. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on. You fought back, and you exposed corruption that was hurting all of us." Over the following months, word spread about what had happened in our community. I started getting calls from homeowners in other neighborhoods facing similar situations with their HOAs. I could not help all of them, but I shared what I had learned and connected them with Marcus, who was building quite a reputation as an HOA watchdog attorney. The local news even picked up the story, running a segment about HOA abuse and conflicts of interest. I did an interview, explaining how a simple snow plow had led to uncovering thousands of dollars in fraudulent activity. The segment went viral online, and suddenly, I was getting messages from people across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was surreal, but it also felt important. HOAs have tremendous power over people's homes and lives, and when that power is abused, it can be devastating. Too often, homeowners feel helpless against the bureaucracy and the threat of fines or liens on their property. But this situation had shown that it was possible to fight back, to demand accountability, and to win. The following summer, the HOA held elections for new board members. I was approached by several neighbors asking if I would consider running for a position. I declined, preferring to stay out of the politics, but I did encourage several level-headed, honest people to run, and I was pleased when they won seats on the board. The new board implemented several reforms, including mandatory disclosure of any business relationships, term limits for board positions, and a formal process for homeowners to challenge policies or fines. They also established a community fund to help elderly or disabled residents with services like snow removal, using volunteer labor from neighbors who were willing to help. It was not a perfect system, but it was a vast improvement over what we had before. Sharon and Gregory essentially disappeared from the local area. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved to Ohio and were trying to rebuild their lives away from the scandal. Part of me felt a small amount of sympathy for them, but mostly I just felt satisfied that they had faced consequences for their actions. Helen Sanders, the woman whose husband had needed dialysis, became a good friend. She and Gerald would invite me over for dinner occasionally, and she never stopped thanking me for helping them that night. She told me that if I had not cleared their driveway, Gerald would have missed his appointment, and his doctor had later said that missing that session could have had serious health consequences. That, more than anything else, reinforced that I had made the right decision in defying the HOA's ban, even knowing I would face fines. Some things are more important than money or following unjust rules. The story could have ended there, with a neat resolution and everyone moving on with their lives. But there was one final twist that came about 8 months after Sharon's removal from the board. I was at home on a Saturday afternoon in October when there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 people I did not recognize, a man and a woman in business casual attire, carrying folders and looking serious. "Zachary Carson?" the woman asked. "Yes, can I help you? My name is Jennifer Walsh, and this is my colleague Martin Reese. We are investigators with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office, Consumer Protection Division. We are following up on the complaint filed regarding Sharon Mitchell and the HOA matter. Do you have a few minutes to speak with us? I invited them in, curious about why they were here so long after the case had been settled. Jennifer explained that during their investigation into Sharon and Gregory Mitchell, they had discovered something much larger. Premium snow solutions had not just been operating in our community. Gregory had secured similar arrangements with 5 other HOAs in the greater Pittsburgh area. And in each case, there was a board member who had a connection to him, usually through family relationships or business partnerships. We believe the Mitchells were part of a larger scheme to defraud HOAs and homeowners throughout western Pennsylvania, Martin said. The total amount we are looking at is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That is insane, I said. How did they think they would get away with it? They were banking on the fact that most homeowners do not pay close attention to HOA finances, and board members often have unchecked authority, Jennifer explained. If you had not pushed back and forced the investigation, they probably would have continued operating indefinitely. Your case broke the whole thing open. They asked me to provide additional statements and documentation, which I was happy to do. Over the next year, the Attorney General's office built cases against Gregory Mitchell and several accomplices, including board members from other communities who had participated in the scheme. The scope was staggering. Gregory had created multiple shell companies, not just premium snow solutions, but also a landscaping company, a property management company, and a maintenance contractor. He would approach HOA board members, offer them kickbacks or business partnerships, and they would push through policies requiring homeowners to use these overpriced services. In our community alone, we had only caught the snow removal aspect. The Attorney General's investigation revealed that Sharon had also been planning to push through mandatory landscaping contracts and property management services, all of which would have funneled even more money to Gregory's various companies. The total fraud across all affected communities exceeded $800,000. The criminal trials took place over a 2-year period, and I testified in several of them. Gregory Mitchell ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, theft, and racketeering. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all affected homeowners. Sharon's involvement was more complicated. Prosecutors believed she had known about the larger scheme, but they could only prove her participation in our community's case. Her probation was revoked, and she ended up serving 18 months in county jail for violating the terms of her plea agreement. Several other board members from different communities also faced charges, with outcomes ranging from probation to prison sentences depending on their level of involvement. Throughout this extended legal process, I became something of an accidental advocate for HOA reform. I was invited to speak at community meetings, to testify before state legislative committees considering HOA regulation bills, and to share my story with homeowner groups across Pennsylvania. It was strange and uncomfortable at times, being thrust into that role. I was just a regular guy who wanted to help his neighbors clear snow from their driveways. But I also recognized that the platform gave me an opportunity to push for real change. Pennsylvania eventually passed new legislation strengthening disclosure requirements for HOA board members, increasing penalties for conflicts of interest, and making it easier for homeowners to challenge unfair policies. It was not perfect legislation, and it had been watered down from the original proposals, but it was a step in the right direction. As for my little snow removal operation, it continued to thrive. I never tried to turn it into a real business. I kept it simple, charging reasonable rates just to cover my costs and a bit of my time. During the winter months, my phone would ring regularly with neighbors asking for help, and I would spend my evenings and weekends clearing driveways, salting walkways, and making sure people could get in and out of their homes safely. It felt good. It felt meaningful. And it was a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of helping your neighbors can lead to much larger impacts than you ever anticipated. Frank became one of my closest friends through all of this. He had been with me from the beginning, supporting my fight against the HOA, gathering signatures, attending meetings, and standing up when it mattered. We would meet up regularly for coffee or beers, talking about everything from sports to politics, to the ongoing saga of HOA drama that never quite seemed to end, even with new leadership. One evening, about 3 years after the initial confrontation with Sharon, Frank and I were sitting on my back deck, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. It was early autumn, and there was a crispness in the air that promised winter was not far off. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just complied with the ban?" Frank asked, taking a sip of his beer. "Sometimes," I admitted. "My life would certainly be less complicated. I would not have spent hours dealing with lawyers and investigators. I would not have my face on the local news. But people would still be getting ripped off. Sharon and Gregory would still be running their scam, and it would have expanded to other services. People on fixed incomes would be paying hundreds of dollars for services they could not afford. Someone might have been seriously hurt or worse because they could not get their driveway cleared in an emergency." Frank nodded slowly. "You did the right thing, man. Even when it was hard, even when it cost you, you did the right thing." "We did the right thing," I corrected. "I could not have done any of it without people like you backing me up." "True, but you were the one willing to put yourself out there first. That takes guts." The next winter brought another significant snowstorm, and I was out before dawn with my plow blade, working my way through the neighborhood. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that is backbreaking to shovel but satisfying to plow. I had developed a routine over the years, a mental map of who needed help and in what order to do the driveways most efficiently. I was finishing up Helen Sanders' driveway when she came out with a thermos of hot chocolate, as had become our tradition. "You are an angel, Zach," she said, handing me the steaming cup. "Gerald and I do not know what we would do without you." "How is Gerald doing?" I asked. "Good, all things considered. His treatments are going well. We just celebrated his 76th birthday last week." "That is wonderful." "Tell him I said happy birthday." "I will. You know, I think about that night a lot. The night you helped us when the HOA said you could not. You risked those fines to make sure Gerald could get to his appointment. Not many people would do that. Anyone with a conscience would do that, Helen." "You would think so, but I have lived a long time and I can tell you that is not always true. People get scared of authority, even petty authority like an HOA board. They follow rules even when the rules do not make sense, even when the rules hurt people. You did not do that. You saw someone who needed help and you helped. That matters." I finished my hot chocolate and thanked her, but her words stayed with me as I continued through the neighborhood. She was right that people often follow rules without questioning them, even when those rules are unjust or harmful. It was easier to comply, to keep your head down, to avoid confrontation. But sometimes, standing up and saying no is the only moral choice. As the years passed, the story of the HOA snow plow ban became something of a legend in our community. New residents would hear about it and seek me out, wanting to know if it was really true. The story had grown in the telling, with some versions making me sound like some kind of crusading hero who had single-handedly taken down a corrupt organization. The reality was much more mundane. I was just a guy with a plow blade who got fed up with being pushed around by a petty tyrant on a power trip. But I understood why the story resonated. Everyone who has ever dealt with an HOA has experienced that frustration, that feeling of helplessness against arbitrary rules, and the people who enforce them with zealous enthusiasm. My story gave people hope that it was possible to fight back and win. The HOA itself underwent significant changes over those years. The new board was much more responsive to homeowner concerns. They held regular open meetings, published detailed financial reports, and actually seemed to care about making the community better rather than just enforcing rules for the sake of rules. Property values in the neighborhood increased, which the board liked to credit to their effective management. But I think it had more to do with the fact that people wanted to live in a community where neighbors helped each other, where there was accountability in leadership, and where common sense prevailed over bureaucratic nonsense. I was now in my mid-30s, still living in the same house, still clearing driveways in the winter. I had dated here and there, but nothing serious had stuck. My life was quiet and relatively simple, which was exactly how I liked it. Then one December morning, I got a call from Marcus, my lawyer who had become a good friend over the years. "Zach, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Sharon Mitchell is getting out of prison next week." I sat down heavily, processing that information. It had been almost 4 years since everything had happened. I knew intellectually that her sentence would not last forever, but I had not really thought about what it would mean for her to be released. "You think she will come back to this area?" I asked. "I doubt it. She has burned every bridge here, but I wanted you to know, just in case. I also wanted to tell you that I heard from a colleague that she has been telling people in prison that this is all your fault, that you ruined her life." "I did not ruin her life, Marcus. She ruined her own life by being greedy and corrupt. I know that, and you know that. I am just saying, be aware. People who blame others for their own mistakes can be unpredictable." I thanked Marcus for the warning and hung up, feeling uneasy. I did not think Sharon would actually try to do anything to me, but the thought of her being out and potentially vindictive was unsettling. As it turned out, my concerns were unfounded. Sharon did not return to the area. According to Marcus's sources, she moved to Florida to live with a sister and was working a low-level administrative job, trying to rebuild some semblance of a life. Gregory was still in federal prison and would be for several more years. Premium Snow Solutions and all his shell companies had been dissolved, the assets liquidated to pay restitution to the affected homeowners. Justice, imperfect as it was, had been served. Life continued in the neighborhood. Seasons changed, people moved in and out, kids grew up. The community center, where we had held that contentious HOA meeting, got renovated. The playground was updated. Small improvements that made the neighborhood feel cared for and maintained. I stayed involved in the community, not as a board member but as an engaged resident. I attended meetings when important issues were being discussed. I voted in HOA elections. I spoke up when I thought something was wrong, and every winter when the snow fell, I attached my plow blade and went out to help my neighbors. It never got old, that feeling of clearing a path, of making someone's day a little bit easier. There was something deeply satisfying about physical work that produced immediate, visible results. You could see the difference you made. Frank and I were having coffee one morning when he brought up something I had been thinking about but had not articulated. "You know what the real legacy of all this is?" he asked. "It is not just that Sharon got caught or that people got their money back. It is that you reminded everyone in this neighborhood that we are supposed to be neighbors, not just people who happen to live near each other. What do you mean? Before all this happened, people kept to themselves. Everyone was in their own bubble. But when you started fighting the HOA, when people started coming together to support you and investigate what was really going on, something changed. People started talking to each other again, helping each other, caring about the community as a whole rather than just their individual property. He was right. I had noticed it too, but had not connected it to the HOA conflict. The neighborhood felt more connected now, more like an actual community. There were block parties and holiday gatherings. People watched out for each other's houses when someone was on vacation. Kids played together in the streets and yards. It was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. As I write this now, almost 5 years after that morning when Sharon showed up on my driveway with her clipboard and her outrage over my plow blade, I can see how much has changed. Not just in our community, but in how HOAs across Pennsylvania operate, at least to some degree. The legislation that passed has made it harder for board members to engage in the kind of corruption Sharon practiced. Homeowners are more aware of their rights and more willing to question policies that do not make sense. There is more transparency, more accountability. It is not perfect. HOAs still cause problems, still overstep, still prioritize aesthetics over common sense. But it is better than it was. My plow blade is hanging in my garage right now, ready for the next storm. The truck it attaches to is getting older, like me, but it still runs strong. I have thought about upgrading, but there is something comforting about using the same equipment that started this whole saga. People sometimes ask me if I would do it all again, knowing what I know now about how complicated and consuming the fight would become. The legal battles, the investigations, the testimony, the media attention, all of it. I always answer the same way. Yes, I would do it again. Because the alternative was to let injustice stand, to let people be exploited, to prioritize my own convenience and peace over doing what was right. That is not who I am. That is not who I want to be. The snow is forecast to start falling again tonight. It is supposed to be a big one, maybe 10 or 12 inches by morning. My phone has already started ringing with neighbors asking if I will be available to help clear driveways. I told them all the same thing I always do. I will be there. Because that is what neighbors do. They help each other. They look out for each other. They stand up for each other when someone tries to take advantage. A plow blade attachment seems like such a small thing to fight over. But it was never really about the plow. It was about standing up to bullies, about exposing corruption, about protecting people who could not protect themselves. It was about being the kind of person who does the right thing, even when it is hard, even when it costs something, even when it would be easier to just comply and move on. That morning when Sharon showed up on my driveway, she thought she was enforcing a simple rule. She thought her position and her clipboard gave her power over me. She was wrong. Real power does not come from a title or a gavel or the ability to levy fines. Real power comes from people coming together, from standing on principle, from refusing to accept injustice just because it is wrapped in official policy. The snow is starting to fall now, light flakes drifting past my window. I can see my truck in the garage, waiting. The plow blade is ready. And so am I.